Hello, my name is Fred Cole, and I'm the worship leader for today's service. Well, here we are. It's the fifth and last Sunday in May, and it does promise to get a little drippy later this afternoon. It also marks the official beginning of summer. Now, I know this because most of our favorite TV programs this week have been broadcasting their season finales. We welcome all at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder. If you are joining us for the first or second time as a visitor, please email our office manager, Amy Zen, and let her and us know how you found us. You'll find her email in the Zoom chat. Our church website also has a great deal of information about the church and our other activities. You're welcome to check us out. And also, tomorrow is Memorial Day. Some parts of the country, it's still called Decoration Day. And there are many versions of how and where the traditions surrounding this holiday got started. The one that I like best is back in 1865, about 2 months after the Civil War had ended. A group of women in Charleston, South Carolina, decided to honor the fallen soldiers from the Confederacy by decorating their graves with flowers. But because Charleston had also been the site of a prisoner of war camp, their cemeteries also contained the numerous graves of Union soldiers. And because they had enough flowers, they decided they'd honor all of these fallen brothers. They chose the 30th of May as the day to do this because across the span of the entire Civil War, May 30th was the only day of the year that had not been involved in some major battle during that conflict. We have a very special guest in our pulpit this morning, and I'll ask Allison Churnside to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Fred. I have the great honor to introduce the Reverend Sarah Gibb Millspaugh today. Sarah grew up at UUCB in the 80s and 90s, as did I. Our family shared many church activities, trips, and holidays together. I always looked up to Sarah and thought she was super cool. Reverend Sarah now lives in San Diego and serves our movement as congregational life staff for the Pacific Western region of the Unitarian Universalist Association. She is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School and was ordained to the UU ministry in 2005. I am absolutely thrilled to have Reverend Sarah visiting us today, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing from her. Now, please ensure your microphones remain muted as Sarah invites us all to join in this morning's worship.
Thank you, Allison. And I always thought you were super cool too. Whether gathering at 5001 Pennsylvania Avenue or in the electric ether of cyberspace, the spirit of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Boulder is strong and expansive. I call us into worship this morning with gratitude for our capacity to grow together, to learn together, to transform in spiritual community. May our time together this morning, in this period of so much transition for UUCB and our nation and our world, may this time ground us and remind us of our truest natures, our truest callings, and our capacity to create and recreate a just and loving community. May it be so. Amen.
If you have a personal chalice or candle near your computer, please get ready to light it now. We invite you to type in the chat box where your chalice is being lit, the street or the neighborhood, or what city you're joining us from outside of Boulder County. Alan Davis will light this morning's chalice.
I thought we were having a morning hymn now.
We
Sorry,
did kind of skip over that. Would anybody like our hymn?
I think we ought to have a hymn. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Let's go to We Give Thanks.
And we do.
And we do.
Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here and those far away, for this time we share with love and care. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day. Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here, and this far away, for this time we share, with love and care, Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, Oh, we give thanks for this precious day, for all gathered here, and this far away, for this time we share, with love and care, Oh, we give thanks for this precious day.
Well, since everybody already has their chalices here, now, Alan, would you like to light it for us, please?
Good morning. I'm Alan Davis, and I've been a member of this church since 1983. And this church has meant many things to me. It is a community of religious belief and practice, and religious belief and practice are central to who I am. It is a community of shared mission and values, practicing social justice and addressing climate change. And this is also central to who I am. And it is a community of people I care about and learn from and rely upon and respect and worry about. And that is definitely central to who I am. I want to light our chalice this morning in honor of relationships. COVID narrowed my circles of relationship as I imagine it narrowed everyone's. For more than a year, I only got together with people that I had arranged to get together with on Zoom. With vaccinations allowing things to open up, I'm now getting together with people I hadn't planned to get together with. Friday, I went to Big Daddy Bagel, and there were Nicole Delormier and Bonnie Chrissy from UUCB. And they motioned me to join their table, and we sat outside, and I learned about their love of skiing and their leadership in the Flatiron Ski Club and other things I hadn't known. So spontaneity is coming back to our relationships and the opportunity to connect with new people. When our daughter Allison started attending Burbank Junior High, which is now Manhattan Middle School, she was 12. And like nearly all 12-year-olds, she felt a strong need for friends. Coming from an elementary school where you knew everyone to a big middle school where you knew only a few people was scary. The friends she had made at this church supported her then when she needed that kind of support. And we, the parents, grew closer to one another as our kids grew closer to one another. And so the Gibbs, the Churnsides, the Ashenhurst Meals, the Holtz, the Befflers, the Fit Peasters. These were all parents like me who had kids that my children knew. Some of those families have moved away, but the remarkable thing is that all of those families remain my friends. And both of my daughters care not only about the children who are their age that they grew up with in this church, but the parents of those grown children as well. So I light this chalice to the possibility of new relations, intergenerational relationships, relationships across differences of all kinds as this pandemic recedes and we enter a new era of connections and hope.
We now invite all of those gathered in our various locations to join together in fellowship and community as we say aloud our congregation's covenant. We gather
They're in fellowship to speak truth to each other, to reach out and touch one another, to care with each other, and to seek the truth blind. So be it.
In this deep connection with all of life, let us tune in to our own joys and concerns. What is on your mind and in your heart today? In the quiet of your own thoughts, lift up all that weighs on you: grief, worry, pain. Whatever it is, let us hold this and each other in silence. Now let us turn our minds and hearts to those that we love, holding them with love, acknowledging their painful challenges and suffering. I invite you now to share your concerns in the chat box, and I will name a few of them.
No.
And Allison mentions the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. That was a horrible event. And Sarah Gibb mentions prayers for her mother-in-law, Carol Millspaugh, who is in the hospital. Steve mentions the families of still more victims of gun violence. And we lift up with Pat Walters, remembering her brother, Steve Peters, Special Forces officer killed in the Vietnam War. And we all share with concerns with Alan for the people of India and Brazil and all the countries where people have not been vaccinated. Oh, Mary, the sadness and anger at the polarized state of our federal government, our world. Ginny talks about her son Arthur, who's had more rain and he is dealing with flooding. Catherine Wardle is talking about some of the flooding. Yes, we really wish that some of this rain could just be sent right over to the western slope. Lillian is concerned and joyful about going back to work in person. And Amy is join with her to send thoughts and prayers to her mom, Betty Phillips, who's in the last stage of cancer. So please continue posting if you wish. And we offer love and witness to all those who are suffering and worried and bearing burdens. And now I invite you to bring to mind and into your heart the things for which you are grateful and which bring you joy. And you can post your joys and celebrations in the chat box, and I will lift some of them up. Karen Morgan is pleased that the search committee has made a choice, and we're all excited about meeting David Schmidt. We're so grateful to our wonderful ministerial search committee. They've worked so hard. This has really been a process, and they have borne that. Bonnie, we join with you to hold our friends old and new. And Nicole, gratitude for every day this side of the church. Sharon LaRock's granddaughter Claire is graduating from high school. Susan and Tim are grateful for the life of Carolyn Hines, Tim's oldest sister, who died in Ohio on Thursday. Oh, that's a sad and happy thing, isn't it, to have had a wonderful life. Candace is sharing joy for her wife Martha's birthday coming up. Oh, and the joy of migrating birds. Kate, we share that with you. I saw a Western tanager on our feeder yesterday. Catherine Wardle, kids and grandkids everywhere, bless their joy and innocence, and celebrating with Lisa. Lindsay Hughes graduating from Fairview last weekend, all the graduates, great celebrations there. With joy, we celebrate with all of us, our whole community, and for all these blessings and concerns, as well as those that remain silently in our hearts, we hold this compassionate space with love. Thank you for all the ways that you bless each other.
Our reading by Unitarian Universalist minister and Army chaplain George Tiger honors the continuing loss, grief, and trauma that we contend with on Memorial Day and beyond. Chaplain Tiger's reading begins with 3 lines from a 1940 poem by Archibald MacLeish and continues with his reflection in first person. The young dead soldiers do not speak. They have a silence that speaks for them at night and when the clock counts. They say, "We were young. We have died. Remember us." I met Scott's father a year after he was killed. It was a pilgrimage for me. I drove 1,000 miles every moment, wondering if he'd see me as a symbol of a system that had taken his son. When he and his wife met me in their front yard, Mike and I hugged tightly for too short an eternity. As an Army chaplain and therapist, I understand the spiritual, psychological, and physiological foundations of trauma. I can talk for hours about how the body keeps the score, about vagus nerve response, about the fight, flight, or freeze mechanism. I can reflect with you about the spiritual meaning of loss, grief, and suffering, how they fit in your life, and how they can burden the soul if held too tightly. I understand all this, yet not a day goes by when something doesn't bring to mind a young life now gone. Ghosts of what might have been are my everyday companions. I will not let them go, for I fear if I do that, I will forget. I'm greeted when least expected with waves of unbidden grief, a tightness in my throat, vision blurred and a bit by welling tears, a little tremor in my hand. All things that remind me that I cannot, I will not forget. How many children lost? How many parents grieve? These memories, these ghosts are necessary reminders of the futility of war and the desperate need for peace in our world. The memories which come upon me not as thoughts, but as bodily sensations have deepened my compassion and steeled my commitment to bringing peace to this suffering world. I serve in the US Army. I support the readiness of those who have and will fight and win the wars our civilian leaders call us to fight. I love the people I am called to serve, knowing full well the dreadful reality we will one day face again. How then can I speak of peace? This is the difficulty of a holiday like Memorial Day. Memorial Day is not to be celebrated. It is to be observed, scrutinized, and witnessed on behalf of the true witnesses of our human failure to love our neighbor as ourselves. They are ghosts now, haunting lives with the gift of remembrance, so that we will not forget their living, but even more, that the grief of remembering will create in us a yearning for peace that will stir us to action. Here ends the reading. A yearning for peace that will stir us to action. Honoring our capacity to transform our ways and rebuild our communities. As we heal from the shooting, as we prepare to emerge even further from our pandemic cocoons, as we prepare the UU Church of Boulder to meet Reverend David Schwartz, who you hope to call as your next minister, I invite us into prayer with the words of my friend and colleague, the Reverend Marta Valentin. Silent meditation will follow the prayer. By the grace of the divine power, which is larger hearted than we can ever imagine, we are constantly given the opportunity to begin again. As the signposts along the continuous journey suggest twists and turns we had not brought into view, for the focus was on the mountain just up ahead beyond the ridge. By the faith of the divine power that lives through the trust of our human ability, we are constantly offered the challenge to test the waters, not just smooth the inevitable ripples to a satiny gloss finish, as if that were the goal in life, losing all character by not realizing The swells are what make life interesting, intriguing, and indescribable. By the love of the divine power whose very core is compassion for our earthly missteps on this journey, we are constantly given an opening to remember that we each have a place in the kingdom of humanity, and the knowledge and courage to begin again toward a faith-filled, loving grace that is our birthright. The courage to begin again toward a faith-filled and loving grace that is our birthright. I invite us to meditate on these words in silence. Amen, and blessed be.
Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain singing. Calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing. Voice still and small, deep inside all, I hear you call, singing. In storm and rain, sorrow and pain, still will remain singing, calming my fears, quenching my tears, through all the years, singing.
There is a canyon not far from my home in San Diego. A coastal hills wilderness it is, with California live oaks, sprawling sycamores, towering Torrey pines, and blooming sagebrush. It is gorgeous, especially at this time of year. Swallowtail butterflies lay eggs in the wild fennel. Wren-tit birds call out from under bushes with their characteristic beep, 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 beep call. When I hike in this canyon, this little strip of wilderness in the city, I feel alive, peaceful, and held. At some of my most grief-stricken times in the pandemic, I have felt the presence of God there in the breeze, the spirit of life surrounding me. When I'm in this canyon, my senses come alive. My body relaxes in a way I just can't do indoors. There, amongst the plant and animal community of the chaparral, I feel consoled and brought home to myself. Perhaps you too have found deep consolation in wild places during this pandemic. Such wild places are becoming more and more rare. Wilderness and sprawling Western cities like yours and mine is quickly getting bulldozed, boxed in, strained, and squeezed. My wild canyon itself has a highway running through one side of it. For years, I'd walk through the canyon and I would feel despair about how the coastal hills used to all be this unspoiled, with such harmonious and resilient ecosystems. And I would silently give thanks for whoever the humans were who fought, perhaps at great cost, to preserve this canyon from development, to let the live oak, the sage, and the animals stay. But one day my dog stuck her nose in the bushes and I noticed something about a particular live oak tree that I'd never noticed before. Little poles, 2 round poles, one on each side of the trunk. And I looked at another oak and I saw the same thing, little poles, the kind that hold up a young tree when it is planted. I looked beside the sprawling sycamore and yes, there were poles there too. It suddenly dawned on me, this canyon was not wilderness preserved, it was wilderness reclaimed. It turns out this wild canyon had been ranch land and agricultural land before the area got built up. Its natural state had been quite disrupted. It turns out that this wild canyon that I enjoy today is an ecosystem intentionally cultivated by people with the wisdom of millions of years of evolution in mind. That makes me think about our lives and communities. What is our spiritual community's task? It is not to prevent change and preserve everything, even though sometimes I think that would be nice. It's not to keep bad things from ever happening either. We couldn't do that if we tried. Our spiritual task is to find a way to tend and retend the ecosystems around us and the ecosystem of our congregation so it can thrive through all kinds of upsets. So it can be born, reborn, and renewed to bring forth the congregation's healing and life-giving potential. In this time when our lives and our congregations have been disrupted, put out of balance, we too have a chance to reorient ourselves to that ancient wisdom that tells us how to be in relationship with one another and the holy. We can rebuild and reclaim a wilderness ecosystem, a healthy, vibrant, relational, and life-giving way of being. In this time of COVID, we have lost people who were dear to us. We have witnessed suffering and we have felt helpless in its face. We've been cut off from faraway family. We have let go of friendships, especially casual friendships, the ones not strong enough to keep up with intentionally. We've let go of relationships, even marriages that just couldn't survive the strains of these times. Away from our schools, our workplaces, our church buildings, the institutions we centered our lives around, the ecosystems of our lives have been tremendously collectively disrupted. And in the midst of that, in Boulder, a mass shooting, disrupting life as usual in a whole other way with waves of grief and anger and righteous rage and tearful remembrances. And here at the UU Church of Boulder, the disruption began even before COVID, with Reverend Kelly Dignan, much beloved, resigning, and you didn't want her to go. And after that, Reverend Eric Poza, your interim minister, was here for a year, but needed to leave the high altitude for health reasons in the middle of a pandemic. And you haven't even been able to be together in person yet since Reverend Eric departed and Reverend Jeremy Nickel arrived. Whew. It's been a lot of disruption. And as you begin dipping your toes in the water of regathering in person, you'll get to meet Reverend David Schwartz and his family and consider the question of calling Reverend David as your next settled minister. You can't, through all of the disruption, you can't prevent or take back those pains and those losses or preserve everything you once were. But you can cultivate resilience and sustainability as you move forward. So I ask us now, as we begin to emerge from all the limitations of COVID pandemic, and as you begin to move into a new ministry, how can UUCB be like that canyon I described, a disrupted place that is growing back into a wildly healthy place? It takes some intention, like the intention and organization of those people who planted those little native oaks and pine seedlings and spread the grass seeds all those years ago. Having known UUCB for 36 years now, I have seen you reclaim and reorient your ecosystem of relationship before. I was part of this congregation when the minister was sexually misconducting, and the system just accepted it because that's the way we thought it was. But I was at college when the extremely divisive, destructive conflict broke out toward the end of his ministry, when the extent of his sexual misconduct became public. The minister then moved on, but the wounds that we inflicted on each other in the congregation and the wounds in our ability to trust, those wounds stayed. And even as new people came in, they picked up on the wounding too and acted accordingly. We humans do that. We learn from the subtle and not so subtle cues from what we are to be afraid of. So even decades after he departed, the things that lived on in this congregation's ecosystem were fear and anxiety, a real inability to approach conflict productively, and real difficulty setting boundaries on behavior. But you tended those things with the help of skillful partners as interim ministers and developmental ministers, the partnership of Reverend Kelly Dignan too. UUCB became more healthy and resilient, building up trust, building up the ability to approach conflict productively and well. A test to that resilience came in the form of all the challenges that UUCB faced in deciding to become a sanctuary congregation and in creating sanctuary. And yes, there was anxiety about it and some disagreements, but you stayed in relationship with one another. You problem solved together, and you did it in service of something vitally important, protecting lives. On our UUA regional staff, I work with congregations in conflict and congregations that have survived ministerial misconduct. That's part of what I do in my work. And the way that UUCB has contended with and healed from destructive patterns of the past is really quite commendable. You have together recreated your own metaphorical canyon with a thriving ecosystem. Your work is a model for other congregations that want to heal their ecosystem of relationship. Yet one thing we know from congregations is that during times of upheaval and stress, some of those old patterns come creeping back. Anxieties about conflict, fears of being a bad congregation for ministers. Will any ministers like us when we're in search? Difficulty setting boundaries when people misbehave. It's like this stuff lives in the soil of the congregation's ecosystem, like cicada eggs lying dormant until they spring forth in times of turmoil. So we need to tend that soil, right? Let's talk about how to tend that soil moving forward, so that even in the times of turmoil and disruption, the health and resilience can still be there. A wild canyon ecosystem cannot thrive without a healthy mix of soil. It's the thing that makes everything and everyone else be able to grow here. And I'll say it's a metaphor for the congregation's culture, the way that we are together. That's our healthy soil. A healthy soil enables the ponderosa pines of spiritual transformation to flourish in the congregation and makes the congregation be able to change lives. A healthy soil enables all ages faith development to take root and spring up in unexpected and beautiful places like a huge conglomerate of aspens interconnected beneath our feet. And the culture of a congregation, like the soil of a wild canyon, doesn't have just one recipe. The elements of the soil vary from place to place, even within one canyon. We can be a multicultural congregation, a community of communities, as Paula Cole-Jones describes us. The thing that makes the congregation work culturally is that the soil overall is life-giving. So collectively, how do we continue to nurture the culture of UUCB to bring life to our mission and actualize our transformative power in the lives of all who participate? Well, we can learn a thing or two from composting, spiritual composting. And when we engage in spiritual composting, we're turning the garbage of the past into life-giving lessons for the future. If you've ever composted, you know how that works. The waste from the past it gets turned around, and it becomes soil, fertility for your future plants. But when you're making spiritual compost, some of the same principles apply. First, diverse ingredients help. If you've ever tried to make compost without diversity, it just doesn't work. Piles of green grass turn to mush. Piles of fruit will rot. Piles of leaves just decay. Diversity is an asset when you're building compost, as it is when you're building true community. And this is not just diversity of identity, it's diversity of experience, diversity of perspective. As a congregation is working through the hurts of the past or the pain of the present, the process of lifting up different voices and hearing everyone's stories with respect and acceptance helps us. As we listen deeply to one another, as we speak and feel heard, our energy begins to transform. We learn from one another. The way we connect with one another changes, and wisdom begins to emerge. What did we as a congregation learn from these recent hard experiences? What values have we learned to cherish? What new promises do we want to make to one another? Second, though diversity is good for compost, not everything belongs there. Some stuff will actively get in the way of the processing that needs to happen. Meats and fats, animal excrement, plastic forks, banana stickers, each has its place in the world, but it's not the compost. Likewise, a healthy congregational community has some boundaries on what kind of behavior is acceptable and not acceptable. It's really hard to do the tender and vulnerable work of deep listening and sharing and healing when people are behaving in destructive ways. Maintaining a covenant of right relations and a destructive behavior policy helps the congregation stay attentive to the safety of the space, creating a healthier chemistry among the people and deepening trust. Related to boundary setting is the third thing we can learn from composting: to hold people, to hold the community, not too tightly, but not too loosely either. A compost bin doesn't work if it's packed too tight, and it also doesn't work if it's spread too thin. To do transformative healing work, a congregation needs to give people enough space to be their authentic and independent selves, but also be close enough to express a collective and interdependent identity. Close enough for there to be a we, and yet far enough apart that we each still have an I. We each have our own stories, and we together have a story. And we need to have room for others to join us and help us write that story. The way we hold each other in mutual support, close enough, but always making space for new folks, is foundational to the thriving congregational ecosystem. And finally, there's the work of turning the compost. The compost must be turned over and stirred regularly with a pitchfork in order for it to do the work of transformation. For us, this means turning over memories, events, and experiences in our heads, talking and listening with others, telling our story until we understand the experience in a newly empowering way. Noticing and claiming our own parts of the messes of the past, gaining insight into how we might do things differently in the future. Your interim ministries and your ministerial search discussions, they help turn the collective compost of UUCB, helping you gain healing and wisdom and empowerment for the future. And soon, if you vote to call him, you will get to turn that compost some more with a new minister. You together create the culture of the UU Church of Boulder. And that's your job as participants in the congregation, whether you are brand new or lifelong members or anything in between. You create the soil, and together we manage this forest, this ecosystem of a congregation, and we can do it for maximum health and diversity. And we don't have to be any kind of a leader to create the soil. All the small interactions here at the UU Church of Boulder, the way we say hello, the response we write on that email, the way we catch ourselves before the hurtful words come out of our mouths, the way we apologize and make amends when they do, the way we speak up in love when we disagree, the ways we show respect to one another, the way we find the courage to be vulnerable, the way we let ourselves learn and be transformed. All of these interactions, small and large, they add up to our culture here. This is how we together are the soil that helps this ecosystem thrive. What makes your mission, your brave connections, your deepened spirituality, your embodied justice, your steadfast love, what makes that mission shine out in our hearts and in the world. And there is some good news. It's not always so much work, and you are not alone. Once ecosystems get going with a great mix of soil and plants and life in them, they need less and less active tending to stay healthy. The ecosystem is always open to newcomers, always changing, always adapting, yet the system finds a sort of balance. Health and vibrancy create health and vibrancy. Life nurtures life. It becomes who we are and how we live. The canyon that I love to walk in, that wilderness reclaimed, is not unique and alone, and you are not either. The health of that canyon is fed by a whole network of other wild places, up and down the coast, inland to the Rockies, even north and south to the tundra and the tropics. Birds and butterflies travel through all those wild places. Animals like bobcats and coyotes spread the seeds in their scat. Even people exchange information about how to best care for these wild places. Just like this canyon is connected to a whole network of health, so are you. All of the other UU congregations, your Unitarian Universalist Association, we are sharing in your journey, supporting you and helping you thrive. And you support us and you help us thrive. We are deeply interconnected, part of that interdependent web of life that our seventh principle so eloquently celebrates. As we begin to move out of this pandemic and into a new ministry, may we live into health, may we live into thriving. May it be so, and amen.
Our Share of the Plate partners during the month of May have been the Bridge House Community Table and Ready to Work programs. In 2018, Maria came to Bridge House's Ready to Work program at the age of 27, having just been released from prison. She successfully graduated from Ready to Work, has regained custody of her children, and is now working on the final stages of achieving her certification to become a peer and family support specialist. And Maria is also currently in the process of purchasing a home. This is another success story from Bridge House, where they believe there's nothing in the world that can make us think that this is something too complicated to solve. There's nothing in the world that can stop us from getting our job done every day for every person, because it is the right thing to do. You can make a donation now using the link posted in our chat, by sending a check directly to UUCB, or by scanning the QR code on the next slide with your mobile phone. Please be as generous as you can. We will now receive the offering. By funding our church and our nonprofit partners, we create connections, relationships, and belonging within our wider community. Your generosity is appreciated. Thank you.
We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. We can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom
We close our service and extinguish our chalice with the words of Reverend Teresa Soto from their book, Spilling the Light. In this community, we hold hope close. We don't always know what comes next, but that cannot dissuade us. We don't always know just what to do, but that will not mean that we are lost in the wilderness. We rely on the certainty beneath, the foundation of our values and ethics. We are the people who return to love like a North Star and to the truth that we are greater together than we are alone. Our hope does not live in some glimmer of a distant future. Rather, we know the way to the world of which we dream, and by covenant and the movement forward of one right action and the next, we know that one day we will arrive at home. May you go in peace and go in love.
Go your way in peace, wander as you may. Blessed is the path you take, may love guide you on your way. Go your way in peace, wander as you may. Blessed is the path you take, may love guide you on your way.
Thank you for joining our worship this morning. And thank you, Sarah. We need to have you back. We invite you now, and let me bring Barbara Richards into this. There she is. We invite you to stay with us in our Zoom rooms for a time of fellowship and discussion. And the way this works is our Zoom host will shortly be sorting us into smaller groups. We hope you'll stay with us